Have you ever considered what it must have been like to suffer from a relentless headache in a world without modern medicine? Imagine a pain so severe, so persistent, that the only solution seemed to be to open a window directly into the skull itself. This was not a flight of fancy for our distant ancestors. It was a very real and surprisingly common surgical procedure known as trepanation. This was the deliberate act of drilling, scraping, cutting a hole into the cranium of a living person. It is one of the oldest forms of surgery known to humanity, a practice that stretches back thousands of years into the mists of prehistory, long before the pyramids of Egypt were even conceived. It is a remarkable testament to human ingenuity, and perhaps our desperation. The evidence for this extraordinary practice is not found in dusty old books, but etched directly into the very bones of those who lived long ago. Archaeologists across the globe, from the sun-beaten landscapes of Peru to the green fields of Europe and the vast plains of Siberia, have unearthed thousands of skulls bearing these telltale circular square-shaped holes. What is truly astonishing is that a great many of these skulls show clear signs of healing around the edges of the opening. This is not the mark of a post-mortem ritual. This is definitive proof that the individuals not only survived the perilous operation, but lived on, sometimes for many years, with a permanent opening in their heads. This remarkable survival rate forces us to reconsider our assumptions about ancient peoples. We often picture them as primitive, lacking the sophisticated knowledge we possess today. Yet, they were performing brain surgery of a sort with a success rate that is frankly astounding. They must have possessed a profound, if different, understanding of anatomy. They knew how to avoid the major blood vessels that lie just beneath the bone, and they must have had some methods for managing pain and preventing infection, however rudimentary they may seem to us now. The sheer geographical and temporal spread of the practice suggests it was not a random, isolated experiment, but a widely accepted medical intervention. The question that immediately springs to mind is a simple one. Why? Why would anyone voluntarily submit to having a hole drilled into their head with what were essentially stone tools? The answer is complex and likely varied from one culture to another. It was a desperate measure for desperate times, a powerful response to ailments that had no other name or cure. To understand their reasoning, we must step out of our modern world of sterile operating theaters and precise diagnoses. We must journey back in time, into a world where the lines between the physical and the spiritual were beautifully blurred, and sometimes terrifyingly blurred. The skull was not just bone, it was the very container of the soul. To our ancient ancestors, the world was alive with unseen forces. Spirits, benevolent spirits, malevolent, they influenced the success of a harvest. They influenced the health of an individual. Epilepsy, chronic migraines, severe mental illness were interpreted in a very different light. Malevolent spirit trapped in the head buildup of bad humors, pressure driving the person mad with pain or erratic behavior. The logic becomes surprisingly clear. If a troublesome entity was trapped inside the skull, create an escape route. A hole in the head was not just a medical procedure, it was an act of exorcism. It was a doorway allowing the evil spirit, allowing the noxious pressure to flee the body, restoring health and harmony. Someone writhing in a seizure, someone debilitated by blinding headaches, this spiritual explanation offered cause and a potential cure. It provided hope where there was none, and a tangible action against an invisible tormentor. The community rallied, seeing the trepanner as a surgeon, as shaman, as priest. Beyond the spiritual, there were more practical medical theories. Hippocrates, father of medicine, wrote about trepanation for head injuries. Skull fracture depressed bone inward, causing dangerous pressure on the brain. His solution, cut away damaged bone to relieve pressure and clean the wound. A shift from magical belief to observable physical trauma. The goal, relieve pressure. Perceived cause, a physical blow versus a spiritual invasion. Magical and medical beliefs coexisted for centuries. Warrior treated for a battle fracture, villager treated to release a demon. The skull was the critical gateway, the vessel of consciousness, the source of thought, the battleground for health. Opening it was a profound act, a bold intervention to rebalance the forces that governed life. A physical solution to problems seen in physical and metaphysical terms, a reflection of the ancient worldview. The tools used for this delicate and dangerous surgery were fashioned from the materials at hand, a testament to human resourcefulness. In the earliest periods, going back to the Neolithic era, the surgeon's toolkit was made of stone. Sharp flakes of obsidian flint painstakingly knapped to create a fine cutting edge, were used as primitive scalpel scrapers. A pointed stone drill spun between the palms spun with a bow could be used to perforate the skull. These were not crude, blunt instruments. Obsidian, a type of volcanic glass, can be fractured to produce an edge that is, on a molecular level, sharper than a modern steel surgical scalpel. It required immense skill to use these tools without plunging too deep. As humanity entered the Bronze and Iron Ages, the toolkit evolved. Metal offered new possibilities for strength and precision. Bronze iron, knives, saws, drills. We have discovered specialized surgical kits from Roman times that include various probes, scalpels, a crown trephine. This tool looked something like a modern corkscrew or hole saw. It had a central pin to steady it on the bone and a circular serrated blade that would cut a neat disc of bone, which could then be lifted out. This was a significant technological leap, allowing for a more controlled and arguably faster operation than scraping or drilling with stone. The choice of method often depended on the available tools and cultural traditions. One common technique was scraping. Using a sharpened flint obsidian flake, the surgeon would patiently scrape away at the surface of the skull, layer by layer, in a circular motion, oval motion. This was a slow, laborious process, but it was also relatively safe, as it minimized the risk of accidentally piercing the dura mater, the tough membrane protecting the brain. Another method involved cutting grooves in the bone to form a square rectangle and then carefully prying the section of bone out. This technique is particularly common in skulls found in the Andes region of South America. Regardless of the tool or the specific technique, the procedure demanded an extraordinary level of skill, patience, and anatomical knowledge. The trepanner had to know precisely where on the skull it was safest to cut, avoiding the major sutures, the large veins that run just beneath the bone. They would have needed a steady hand and nerves of steel. Imagine performing this surgery, likely without effective anesthesia, on a conscious or semi-conscious patient. The surgeon was not just a craftsman of bone, they were a master of human endurance, both their own and their patients', working at the very edge of life and death. The experience of undergoing trepanation must have been an ordeal of unimaginable intensity. Before the first cut was made, preparations would have been crucial. It is likely that psychoactive plants were used to dull the senses. Potent alcoholic beverages may also have been used. Coca leaves, Andes, mandrake root, Europe. The patient would have been held down, immobilized by several strong assistants. The site of the operation would be shaved, the area perhaps cleansed with antiseptics. Wine or vinegar might have been used. The surgery itself was a slow, meticulous process. If the scraping method was used, the surgeon would begin wearing down the bone. This could take hours. The sound alone, a persistent, grating scrape against bone, must have been terrifying. The surgeon would periodically check depth by feel, or by observing how the bone dust changed color. Every movement had to be precise. A slip could puncture the protective membrane, leading to infection or death. Once the bone was perforated, the surgeon had to lift out the disc of bone. This disc is known as a rondelle. They had to avoid letting it fall into the cranial cavity. Often the patient kept the bone piece afterwards. It might be worn as an amulet to ward off evil spirits. With the hole open, the surgeon might inspect the area for the source of trouble. The wound would then need dressing, poultices made of herbs, honey as a poultice, spiderwebs used as a dressing. The scalp was carefully stitched back around the opening. The recovery period was the final, critical test. The risk of infection in a pre-antibiotic world was immense. The patient would have been watched over carefully, their fever closely monitored, the wound kept as clean as possible. Many skulls show extensive healing, proof these methods often worked. New bone growth around the hole edges tells a story of survival, a robust immune system, effective folk medicine, the incredible resilience of the human body. Our understanding of trepanation is not limited to the silent testimony of bones. We are fortunate to have a rich visual record captured in art and medical texts. Medieval and Renaissance manuscripts are filled with detailed illustrations of the procedure. These hand-painted drawings depict surgeons at work, surrounded by tools. They show patience, wide-eyed and stoic. Patients are often seated upright in chairs. The trepanner applies a drill or saw to the head. These images give us invaluable context: the how, the who, the where. One famous example, Hieronymus Bosch from the Netherlands, his painting, The Extraction of the Stone of Folly. It depicts a surgeon wearing a funnel as a hat, removing an object from a patient's head. It's satirical commentary on quackery, but it references the belief that madness could be cured by removing a stone from the brain. the artwork shows trepanation as a cultural metaphor for curing absurdity, even while it remained a legitimate medical procedure for others. It highlights the tension between genuine medical attempts and charlatans who preyed on the desperate. 16th and 17th century medical textbooks offer a more clinical view. Works by Ambroise Paré and Andreas Vesalius. Intricate woodcuts and engravings of skulls. Detailed images of surgical instruments. These texts gave step-by-step instructions and detailed different drills. The brace, the bow drill, the crown trephine. They advised on the best locations on the skull to operate. These illustrations were the high-tech learning aids of their day. Medical students could study anatomy and the procedure in detail before approaching a living patient. This marks a shift from mystical tradition to codified surgical science. These images do more than illustrate technique. They give us a glimpse into the medical world of the past. Assistants holding the patient, an array of tools laid out neatly on a table, the focused expression of the surgeon. They transport us into operating theaters of centuries ago, allowing us to witness a procedure that was, for thousands of years, at the forefront of medical intervention. Cave paintings, illuminated manuscripts, early printed books. The visual history of trepanation charts a long, complex story of humanity's quest to understand and heal the mysterious organ within our heads. For millennia, trepanation held its place as a credible, if extreme, medical treatment. However, the tide began to turn with the arrival of the Age of Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries. This was a period of profound intellectual change, where scientific rationalism observation evidence began to systematically replace superstition and ancient dogma. The medical world was not immune to this revolution. Physicians and scientists started to dissect and study the human body with unprecedented rigor, leading to a much more sophisticated understanding of anatomy, physiology, the true causes of disease. The idea of releasing a spirit from the head began to seem increasingly fanciful. The emerging science of neurology played a pivotal role in the decline of trepanation for ailments like epilepsy madness. As scientists began to map the functions of the brain, they realized these conditions were not caused by trapped demons or localized pressure that a simple hole could fix. They were complex disorders of the brain's own intricate electrical systems, chemical systems. Trepanning a person for a seizure now seemed not only ineffective, but dangerously misguided. The focus shifted from releasing supposed malevolent forces to understanding the underlying pathology of the brain itself. Surgery began to be seen as a last resort, reserved for cases of physical trauma like a depressed skull fracture, where its mechanical benefits were clear. Furthermore, the development of new medical treatments offered less invasive and more effective alternatives. The discovery and synthesis of pharmaceutical drugs provided new ways to manage pain control seizures, treat mental illness. With the advent of anesthesia in the mid-19th century, more complex and precise surgeries became possible, but the foundational understanding of disease had changed. Doctors now knew that infection, not evil spirits, was the great enemy in surgery. The work of Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister introduced antiseptic principles, dramatically reducing post-operative mortality, but also reinforcing that indiscriminately opening the body was fraught with peril. By the dawn of the 20th century, trepanation as a general cure-all had been relegated to the history books of medicine. It survived only in its modern, highly refined form, the craniotomy, a precise surgical procedure used by neurosurgeons to treat specific conditions like brain tumors, hematomas, traumatic brain injuries. The ancient practice, born from a world of magic and mystery, had finally given way to a world of science and evidence. Its long reign was over, not because it never worked, but because we finally began to understand why it shouldn't have been expected to for the reasons our ancestors believed. And so, we are left to contemplate this extraordinary chapter in human history. Trepanation stands as a powerful symbol of our species' relentless drive to overcome suffering. It was a practice born of a deep desire to heal, guided by the best knowledge and beliefs of its time. For thousands of years, it represented hope for people afflicted with conditions that were otherwise a death sentence, or a life of unbearable pain. The healed skulls left behind are not monuments to primitive butchery, but to survival. They are proof that in many cases, this audacious surgery actually saved lives and eased suffering, performed with stone, performed with bronze. When we look back, it is easy to judge from our privileged position in the 21st century. MRI scans, antibiotics, sterile operating rooms. We see the brutality and the immense risk. We see the flawed, supernatural reasoning behind much of the practice. We recoil at the thought of a stone drill boring into a living person's skull. Yet the people who underwent this procedure did not have our choices. Their world was one where a severe headache could be a sign of demonic possession. A seizure could be seen as a violent invasion by an angry spirit. In that context, trepanation was not madness. It was a logical, courageous, and perhaps the only option. The story of trepanation is a humbling reminder of how medical understanding evolves. Cutting edge in one era becomes a historical curiosity in the next. The surgeons were not charlatans. They were the leading medical practitioners of their day. Using skill and courage, they pushed the boundaries of what was possible. They tried to mend the most complex and least understood part of the human body with limited tools and knowledge. Their successes, however frightening the method, were nothing short of miraculous. This brings us to a final personal question. Imagine yourself living 3,000 years ago, plagued by a blinding, unrelenting pain inside your head. The village shaman, a respected figure whose ancestors practiced this art for generations, offers the only known solution: a hole in the head to release the pressure. They show you others in the tribe who survived and were cured. Faced with a choice between certain, continued agony and a risky chance at relief, would you have laid down and trusted the ancient surgeon? The answer is not as simple as it first appears.